Okay, welcome to our little session. Open source software isn't just good, it's good for business. I'm Alex Yervik-Acklesberg.
I'm Len Sippin.
And we'll tell you just real quick about, oops, I didn't realize I had these transitions. But, so I am the co-founder and CEO of ZibTech, and we are about a 6-year-old team of open source web development, design, or we're an open source company focused on development, design, and training located in Philadelphia. We're about 20-something people. We specialize in application and product development, including Livit, which is a remote patient monitoring population management system that we built, which you can come find out about up at our booth. I have worked with, just as a couple fun facts about me, I've worked with Drupal since 2004. And I am a proud professional troublemaker and a hat enthusiast. So I'll hand it over to Lev for a sec.
Hey, I'm a partner and director of engineering at ThinkShot. We are located in Portland, Oregon. We've got a team of 18 folks. We specialize in open source engineering, UX, and nonprofit strategy. We focus on the nonprofit niche. I'm proud to say that currently our contributions power over 35,000 websites, so we'll kind of get into our approach to open source contributions to business development and why it's working out for us. I've been doing this for a long time now. I'm a little less enthusiastic about hats, but we've been known to have matching hats at different events, which is the main impetus for this collaboration.
Yeah. So we're going to cover the benefits of open source from two different directions. I'm going to cover first from a consumer perspective, and when I mean consumer, I mean someone that pays people like us or like you to build open source sites for them. So these are organizations or businesses normally, and Lev is going to cover the benefits from the flip side, from the perspective of a shop. Why should you do it? But one thing that we want to, since we have a pretty small group here, one of the things I think that we'd like to do is keep things pretty conversational. This is the first time that we're doing this together, so please feel free, jump in, ask questions, add comments, heckle, throw stuff, just not too sharp. So on the benefits of open source for consumers, the idea from this originally came from several government documents that were released around the time that WhiteHouse.gov went to Drupal. And these documents were basically guidances for the government on how to work with open source and why they should work with open source. The first of these that's up here right now, and I don't know if you can, oh, there we go, bit.ly/DOD-OSSH. This was the guidance from the Department of Defense that was put out the same day that the White House announced they were going to Drupal. And basically, it covered a lot of the reasons that I'm about to go over of why most businesses or organizations should use Drupal or should use open source and how they should use it, and they should use Drupal too. First of all, the problem that I was hoping to address with this is that there's a lot of confusion, especially amongst the business, from my perspective, from the business side or the organizational side of people who are buying open source service. There's a lot of confusion about the nature of it, especially as it relates to things like IP issues or security, things like that, and generally, open source requires a different mindset, and in a publicly, semi-public way, you're going to be developing your software. That's a much different mindset than what's previous to it, where you would have basically people working on their proprietary software behind closed doors. The other problem that I see in the community is that we call we tend to think about open source contributions as sort of like an altruistic act, like that you're just doing something good. But really, the reasons for open source is not, there's a lot of altruistic people in open source, and that's really great, but there's real solid business reasons why you should contribute if you're using open source and why you should use open source. So first of all, what makes open source awesome? Number one, and this is again from that document that I mentioned, the Department of Defense document. Number one is broad peer review. So if you go into the Drupal issue queues, you'll see there is an amazing amount of peer review going on of the code that makes it into Drupal core. Slightly less, but still a lot in contributed modules, and sort of there's like there's a lot of really big ones, and then there's a really long tail of tens of thousands of less widely used modules. But that broad peer review makes things more secure and leads to better quality if there's enough developers working on that open source product. And the reason for the better security, I mean, I always like to say it's like thinking about if there's like an alleyway that you have to walk through, and that alleyway is the uncertainty around the software. Would you rather it be filled with people and and bright lights where everybody can see everybody, or would you rather it be just patrolled by police who you sort of need to trust are going to do the right thing? But we just had the 6 Philly cops, I'm from Philadelphia, busted for robbing drug dealers yesterday by the FBI. I mean, that doesn't necessarily, having a strong police force of your sort of proprietary system is not going to ensure the security, as is evidenced by the numerous Microsoft vulnerabilities that have really almost collapsed the internet at times. One of the big things that one of the big reasons why government in particular, but really anybody that's building on open source that intends to use that site or that application for the long run will look to an open source product, is because of the flexibility that it has over time. Open source tends to change a lot faster in some ways. In some ways it changes a lot slower, but it gives you a lot of flexibility for how you can interact with other things that are happening in the tech world. Also, a very big one here in DC and pretty much anywhere is no vendor lock-in. I was at one of these earlier Capitol camps and heard a story from the Department of the Navy about all these nightmares with weapon systems where somebody had developed the software and they actually put the software in escrow. But you know what? In the meantime, the business went out of that business that built the software went out of business, and they had no more access to the software. So here they are, just stuck with something they know is insecure, doesn't work. Because they're locked into that vendor that may or may not still exist years later. So in this case, no vendor lock-in is obviously a big one. And then there's no restrictions on the users of open source. So there's no per seat licensing that's very common in proprietary systems of the past. So for a government agency like the White House to be able to have 1 million people on their site in a day, that would have cost them, tens of millions of dollars in the past, and that's no longer the case. So, and that, like I just said, so that means you can scale usage as you need it. The shared maintenance, so like you think about all the government agencies that are using Drupal, if they're using the same modules, they get to share that cost amongst all of the departments, leading to an overall lowering of cost. And you see that sort of across industries, not just government, but also in private industry as well. It allows for more iteration and experimentation. So one of the things that if you were in the keynote earlier today that you heard was about sort of how communities are able to form and really start to enable changes to occur with or without the consent of a government or some other big authority. People can really yeah, they can iterate and experiment. I think it says it on its own. And then the other one is the ability to vet developers like us. So when you're going out and hiring developers, before you just have to take the word of the developers that they're experts. But now actually you can just go and look and see how they're working in open source, and if they're contributing, they will have a trail, which I'll show you some of when I go through our workflow. But I think it's really important that you're able to go in and see, like, how are these people working within the community? What types of work are they doing? And I'll show you some of the things that you can look for in a little bit. And really, and this is from Drupal Camp Philadelphia, which is now called Drupadelphia. So I'm gonna go in a little bit about what happens when you, just real fast, what happens when you don't contribute back. So in some sense, we have this thing, don't hack core in Drupal. In ZibTech, we're a little bit more aggressive. We don't hack core, and we don't hack contributed modules. We use custom modules for site-specific code instead. But we do not hack any of those modules. Instead, because of Drupal's hook system, you can, which is what makes the contrib module space possible and is the source of Drupal's flexibility. Basically, what the hook system does is it allows you to alter however something is working from your, and I think I have this backwards. This is a bug, not a feature. It's a feature, not a bug. So, sorry about that. I don't know. I guess I was a little mixed up this morning, or whenever I read it. But at any rate, so you should be able to change the code from that. Whatever another module is doing, you should be able to change how that module is doing it from your code, or we would consider that a bug and make a patch and fix that. Because otherwise we can't maintain sort of the flexibility we need. So what happens when you do hack stuff? Well, you lose the different benefits that I mentioned earlier. Number one, you lose the flexibility and scalability. So you can't take advantage of improvements that happen to a module. So basically, if you create your own version of a module and don't contribute back whatever you changed, then every time that module gets updated, you're done. You can't do it, or else you can't update, or you'll overwrite your past changes. So another big one is that you can't interact with other modules. So other modules are going to assume that you're using the standard hooks in that other, in the module that you hacked, and so you're have a hard time interacting with those. Another one is that you can't use normal scaling tools all the time, because sometimes those caching tools are really looking at core things that are relying upon core things that Drupal are doing. If you're not adhering to those standards, then your site might not scale very well. So the long-term costs, I think, it's like, what is it, the Pottery Barn model? You break it, you own it. So any code that you create that you do not get back into the community as a patch, you now own, and you now pay solely your organization for that code. You own it, and that's not a good thing. You're not able to share the cost with other folks, and obviously nobody else is going to contribute to your private fork of a module or Drupal. Another one that you lose is the wide support and vendor lock-in that you would get normally from open source. So shops like ours aren't going to work on a hacked up module or hacked up Drupal. We're going to want to replace what has been broken, and not. We definitely would not work on a site if we weren't able to. If we weren't able to vet that the code was up to standards. And so then you either get stuck with hackers, and that is, has its benefits as well, I'm sure, since so many people seem to do it, or you have to pay to replace those hacks. So the other one that you lose is obviously the quality assurance process that's deeply embedded within Drupal, and I like to say that with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow. That's the saying about open source. But I like to also add that with few enough eyes, there's no limit to the stupidity and mistakes that people can make. So peer review obviously increases quality, and the QA is then a process that you're doing not just within the Drupal community, but also it means that you're probably doing it internally as well as you're going through code. And then security, right now Drupal has a security team. They are getting reports back of things that are insecure, and they have a whole process based around, well, how do we alert the community? How do we update this? How do we ensure that this is fixed? If you have your own code, you're outside of that process. And we've actually had a client who hacked a common theme, and then that theme was insecure. And so an insecurity was found in the theme. They had hacked it, so they didn't get when the module update or the theme update happened. They didn't get it, and they got hacked, a year or so later. Because once it's widely known, there's going to be people using bots and such to find that. I mentioned earlier about you can't easily apply patches. So anytime there's security, you might need to apply a patch or update the security of it. That be difficult, and you lose those eyes. And so how do you essentially get developers to do that, to contribute, how do you ensure that your developers as a consumer are going of this technology are going to follow these best practices. So this is another Department of Defense. I think this is the Open Technology Development part of the DoD CIO. And basically, their recommendation, so how do you do it? You pay for it. So the DoD recommends that you add a stipulation to your document that forces contractors to contribute back any changes they make to code. And they actually recommend that you, they also recommend that you make incentives to give them basically extra money if and when that code is contributed upstream, so to speak. So if I create a change to the Drupal image module, first of all, the requirement should be that I submit that change as a patch to Drupal.org. But then further, they would say, well, you should put in some sort of incentive so that now when that change gets committed to image module's sort of main suite, and we no longer have to maintain it, that there's a bonus for that activity. So, and you know, I mentioned earlier the confusion. I mean, one of the frustrating things as a company is that I get asked very frequently to do the opposite, to give people discounts in order to contribute back the code, which is the exact opposite of how it should be. So for us, that's non-negotiable. We don't allow clients to tell us how to work professionally. We try to, you know, while we're working, we try to get them on the same page as us, but ultimately, committing code back that we see fit is non-negotiable part of most of our contracts, with minor exceptions. And just, you know, this is just one of those pages. I just wanted to tell you just a little bit about then how we as a team go about looking at a project and deciding when and where to patch modules, as well as when do we use a module, when do we create a new module versus when do we patch an old one. So our normal process is we create specs with our clients, we create an architecture plan, and then we evaluate the landscape of functionality that's out there currently. Now, some of it we already know about. There's very common functionality, but some of it might be a little more esoteric. So we evaluate what's out there, and we determine the approach we're going to take. We use as much community code as possible, but not to a degree where we would not install a module that we could replace with one line of code. I mean, there's definitely exceptions where a whole contributed module is running on your site for one line of code that could be added in a custom module. We'll just add that code. But, you know, as much as humanly possible, we're using community code, and we create custom modules that extend contrib modules, and that's the preference for us, or we create a new module when we need to, and I'll tell you what goes into that in a minute. But then, so then we go through and we patch the existing modules. We track the changes that we make and post them on D.O. And then in our workflow, we have a tool that actually will, so we keep a patches folder inside of our Git repository, and anytime we update a module, it goes and tries to apply that patch. If it doesn't work, it goes, if the issue's closed as fixed, it stops applying the patch because it doesn't need it anymore. If it stops working because something changed in the code that now we have to go in and change the patch, it'll alert us, we'll go in and do that, and the patch will be updated both on Drupal.org and on our site. So we code and resolve issues and review and iterate. So for moduling and patch, so one of the questions that we get asked a lot for our clients is when should we be considering writing a module versus just creating a patch? And basically these are the rules that we follow. Is there a personal and business commitment to maintaining that code moving forward? This is something Lev is going to talk about a little bit about. There's definitely many cases where a module is, you know, going to be a marketing tool, or there's other benefits. I don't want to give him give away his thing, because this is going to lead into his. Is there a business benefit? Is there an itch you want to scratch? These all just fall under same thing. If the answer is no to either of those two things, we patch. And just how extreme can some of those patches be? Well, here's my favorite patch from my partner and our CTO, Jody Hamilton, which was minus 2,500 lines and plus 148, which is Jody's way of saying you're doing it wrong. In this case, the person didn't understand. This is for the LDAP authentication provisioning module. In this case, the person didn't understand how to use Hook User to change the login screen, so they took over the login screen and made their own login screen. Well, anytime another module wanted to come in and now make a change to the login screen, like organic groups or like a newsletter sign up, well, hey, you have to add that code now to their custom login screen. So all we did to fix that was removed all of that and just fixed the Hook User implementation, which fixed it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lev for the benefit from the OSS side.
Thank you, Alex.
So
I'm going to switch perspectives a bit and talk about this more from the standpoint of, you are a professional services firm. What's in it for you for leveraging open source software to build clients, to build projects for your clients, that is. As I mentioned earlier, we've been around for about 4 years, and I guess a humble brag that we've got about 35,000 sites now running on our code. And from the very first day that we opened up, our shop, open source contributions were a huge focus for us. We were a couple of geeks. We weren't particularly polished. We're still not, as you'll see as I stumble through this. But we reached out to the community and to our clients, and the community includes both the developer community, and I'll talk about kind of recruitment and retention, in addition to potential clients. We reached out to them via our contributions. Now, I'll grant you that as we've matured a bit as a firm, we're leveling that out and realizing that we can't just focus on engineering and open source contributions to grow our business. But certainly it kind of got us off the ground and gave us a big head start. So what you're seeing a picture thereof is the logo for our open source CRM built on top of Drupal called Red Hen. And that was, when we first opened up our shop, we, in addition to focusing on open source, we also were going to focus on the nonprofit niche. We refined that a bit, and we're pretty laser focused on working with nonprofits right now. And we saw a huge hole in the community because there wasn't a native Drupal CRM. And we opened up ThinkShout right around the time when Drupal 7 was in alpha. And Drupal 7 was the first time it was even possible to consider building a CRM solution with Drupal. It was the first time you were able to do custom entities and complex relationships and kind of bundle that all into an effective suite of modules. And there were really great open source CRM alternatives. Civi CRM was really great, but there's nothing else built with Drupal, and we were Drupal geeks. We built our sites with Drupal, and we wanted that flexibility and that power within Drupal, and wanted to be able to offer that to our nonprofit clients and help the grassroots and whatnot. And we didn't just build a module generically. We really kind of tried to build a product around it. So we branded it. We kind of told the story around it. And Red Hen is kind of just the most branded example of of our open source contributions. We've got a number of popular modules, and everything we do, it's kind of led to this lead generation cycle because Red Hen is growing in popularity. There's about 1,000 people using it right now, and we hope that maybe a few dozen of those sites are ones that we've worked on, but a lot of clients who need complex solutions built on top of Red Hen, both through the Drupal.org page itself and through our kind of writing and talking about it and going to events like this and talking about it, we're known as the ones who lead the development of Red Hen. We also have participation from the community, but obviously most of the work comes from us. So oftentimes when they want to do customizations on top of Red Hen or projects that have Red Hen as a core component, they come to us first, and we explore if it's a good fit. And there are other companies who are using Red Hen in their development as well, and we obviously nurture and encourage that, because the higher the adoption rate of Red Hen, it's just more of a win for us all around. And I'm using Red Hen as an example. We've kind of taken this approach with, we have the kind of canonical registration solution for Drupal. We wrote kind of some of the integration layers with Salesforce. We do a bunch of work with transactional email providers. So we kind of have this suite of products that are really geared towards our clientele, and I'll kind of get into doing focused contributions. So yeah, I guess I'll leave lead generation at that. And I'm going to keep this real casual and formal. So any questions before I move on? Yeah. You guys may be familiar with the fable of the red hen. It's you got, what is it? There's a hen who wants to make a cake. She tries to get help from her friends, the mouse and the cat. The mouse and the cat don't want to help her. So she does all the work of baking the cake herself, and then of course they want to eat some of the cake, and the hen says, you didn't help. So it's kind of a, it's got a bit of a metaphor to open source software development, and it lends itself to cute logos and metaphors. Barnyard animals, we got all sorts of things. So we got a theme called poultry. Keep running with that one.
And we're bear. We're all bear related.
All right, so Alex kind of touched on this, but here's the thing: developers, believe it or not, are actually just people, and they have egos and pride. And while I think especially with our focus on nonprofits, we think that our developers have a lot of motivation to do really good work. But here's the thing: when they know that their work is going to get a broader audience, so when they're writing code for one of our client projects, we have a kind of built into that cycle that we're going to be releasing that code to the broader community. Right now, like the registration module has 7,000 reported installs in the very active issue queue, and we're constantly updating that through our project work. Well, they know that the work that they're doing is going to get seen by at least those 7,000 developers in the community. When they go to these Drupal events, they're going to bump into other developers who are like, oh, I saw your awesome feature you wrote for that registration module. And that's a really, really strong motivator, as opposed to having kind of blinders on and focusing your work on just a really important project perhaps, a really excellent project perhaps, but one that not a lot of people are going to see, certainly under the hood. Right? We're building websites. You don't see the source code that goes into them usually on the surface. So by having a strong reputation as open source contributors, and kind of following that up with our actual practices, in the sense that for almost every project we do, there's some level of open source contribution, whether it's a new module, improving an existing one, patching one that's not ours. And that's really helped us with recruiting and retention. Kind of a related aspect of that, and Alex did touch on this, but developers can come in and also, as I mentioned, they're people. It's shocking, but people can also be a little bit lazy. And when you are working on a project and code that perhaps is not going to be seen by a lot of people, if any, we try to do peer reviews of code, and as a team lead, I try to do my best to kind of watch over what's going on and do code reviews periodically. I can't review every line of code that's being written. We're going to miss things in QA. But through a combination of two things, first of all, just the education and the process of being an open source contributor leads to really good developer habits. Because you know that when you submit a patch to the queue, if it's garbage, it's going to get torn apart. If you even forget to follow coding standards, you're going to hear about it. So you literally get this constant positive and negative reinforcement about doing things right. And you're going to carry that over into work that doesn't have a public audience as well. So once you kind of get that experience and that practice, then, again, not only are you always going to be writing high-quality code that is open source, but even for the stuff that doesn't really make it out into the wild and stays proprietary to a given project, you've already got that process in place, and you're going to be writing good code. Shifting gears a bit, I mentioned earlier, our success, and I'm not saying this is the only way to approach it, but we've focused our open source contributions on a particular niche. So like at this point, we have like a suite of open source products that we kind of pitch to our clients. And again, our focus is on nonprofits, largely advocacy organizations and associations. So a lot of our work continues to focus in that niche. And at this point, we've got like a strong reputation. I shouldn't say strong. We have a reputation in that area. We participate in NTC. We participate in the nonprofit summit at BADCamp. We're very involved in like nonprofit Drupal tech, and that's where we focus our contributions. And I think that's really kind of reinforced that lead generation cycle. I think you could achieve it, even if you have a really broad base. But there's a lot of shops that are doing open source contributions. A lot of developers are doing open source contributions. The open source ecosystem is thankfully very large. So one way to distinguish yourself from the crowd and really stand out is to really figure out, what are you really good at? I mean, most companies, even if they don't have a specific vertical, they tend to focus on specific areas. So figure out what that is, and where can you make an impact and have a difference, and then focus your contributions on that niche. And I would argue that, if you can do that effectively, you can kind of get this, to use a cliche, get this virtuous cycle spinning. And what I mean with that virtuous cycle is that Well, let me give a concrete example. So we had a client when we were first starting out called it was the Manhattan Kayak Company. They hired us to build not only their website but a registration system for their kayak tours that they held around Manhattan and the Hudson. I don't know why you want to go kayaking in the Hudson, but apparently a lot of people do. At the time, there was you guys remember the sign-up module for D6 maybe. It was great in D6. It wasn't really properly functional in D7. So we had a choice. We could probably spend 20% of the time we did spend and build a specific one-off solution to somehow enable them to do these registrations on their Drupal 7 site. But instead, we kind of partnered with the Manhattan Kayak Company, and we're like, all right, we're gonna, let's say, we thought, we can do this one-off for you for 50 hours. But if we spend 100 hours, we can build like a new registration system for Drupal 7 that your site will be based on. So they agreed, thankfully. I'm kind of making up numbers here, but we ended up, out of that project, we built the entity registration module, which now has 7,000 users or so and growing rapidly. And I think a lot of folks use it. You may have used it if you signed up for this camp. And so we wrote this generic, flexible, powerful solution. And let's say we chipped in 25 hours and they chipped in another 25 hours. So there's value in it for us. So we saw that readily and had no problem meeting that. So what the end result of that relationship is that the Manhattan Kayak Company, their site is based on a really widely adopted code base. They essentially get new features for free. Free as in kittens, granted, but they're basically free, right? If they pay somebody a couple hours to update and reconfigure their module, and all of a sudden they get event reminders, and they can add custom fields to their registrations really easily. They can create custom reports of their registrations, whatever. All these features that are like, well, yeah, okay, we got to add that, we got to add that. They get all that for free over time. They get a higher quality code base because there's 7,000 people using it and thousands of developers contributing to it and having their eyeballs on it. They get a higher quality code base. The community, the Drupal community and the grassroots community who might be using these tools, they get a really great event registration solution. And ThinkShout, we get the lead generation from it. In addition to some satisfaction of having done some good work, there's a slight altruistic component to it, but hey, we benefit from that. When we do a lot of six-figure projects now that have complex custom event registration workflows that are based on this tool that germinated on this really small project. And we try to do that as much as possible for any of our work. I was talking about Red Hen earlier. Red Hen, to get it off the ground was a really big effort. It was thousands of hours. And ThinkShout invested heavily. We did invest probably 1,000 hours or more on it. But so did a lot of our clients. We actually, when we did the initial development of Red Hen, we had 3 different large projects, or 3 different six-figure projects that all had kind of a baseline requirement of some of these features we built into the CRM. And we literally got them all, we transparently got them all on the same page. We used Trello at the time. We had a public, set of Kanban boards that we were developing these features, this product with these 3 clients. They all lopped off a portion of their budget to pool together to build out this feature, and then we met them about halfway. So all of these 3 projects, rather than having kind of 3 different one-off customizations or code bases, or maybe glue something together from some poorly fitting contrib modules, they were all based on that same underlying code base, which has since then matured and grown, and they've benefited from it tremendously, as has the community in ThinkShout. So that's the cycle I'm referring to. Another example of a win from a business side for open source. So we've got a really great relationship with MailChimp. They're an email service provider. They have a campaign service, which is MailChimp, and a sibling transactional mail service called Mandrill. It's been a great partnership for us for a long time now. And the genesis of that relationship is that I wrote the MailChimp module, I don't know, 8 years ago, 6 years ago, something, to scratch my own itch. I had a little startup that needed this integration, and I built it out. It gained in popularity, and I was growing my business, and I didn't really have time to spend maintaining the module. This is a really common problem in the Drupal community. So I reached out to MailChimp, and I was like, hey, I think that this is an opportunity for a real win for everybody involved here. If you guys want to support me and now ThinkShout directly in maintaining and improving this integration, you're going to get more paid clients on your platform. You know, ThinkShout, the community is going to get a well-maintained integration, and ThinkShout again is going to get not only, you know, the business from MailChimp paying us for the time we spend, you know, but the lead generation and PR and goodwill that comes along with being the maintainers of a really popular, at least decent module, I'd say. So that relationship, it's been ongoing. It's really great. And I think that that can be replicated a lot. We've replicated it with 2 other service providers. So again, like MailChimp doesn't have an open source product. I mean, they use a lot of open source technology to build their platform out, of course. But you know, it's a closed stack SaaS. But they've got an excellent API, and they've got the vision to understand that this was a good opportunity. Because at the time, nobody else would even think about doing this. We tried. We reached out to a lot of people, and they were like, "Are you crazy? Like, go talk to like, you know, ExactTarget or Vertical Response, and they'll tell you to get lost." And I think that, you know, so since we took over this module, it's grown from 500 to 16,000 installs. So that's 16. You know, it's 15,000 paid clients that MailChimp has. And I won't tell you the numbers, but their investment has been modest compared to the return that they're seeing on that. So you know, that's not to say that contributions don't have a cost. So you need to really factor that into your business. I mean, we do monthly open source sprints where we give up a whole day for people just to hack away. And we like frequently do what I mentioned earlier in the sense of like, you know, kind of meeting a client halfway, you know, for doing an open source contribution. You know, we balance it out. We don't have the lowest rates. But you know, for us it works out. But there is a cost there, and the other cost too is the burden of maintainership. As you know, this is a big theme in the Drupal community now, and you know, for a long time now, really. But so there's a module that now, so that registration module has got 7,000 users. People really rely on it. What happens when the maintainers stop paying attention or get distracted by other things? All of a sudden, you've got all these sites relying on that code, and it's stagnating. So we feel a really big responsibility. I just got an email yesterday. We released a little niche module called Add to Cal. It provides that little download functionality to export an event into your either Google Calendar or Outlook or whatever it is. You see it like on Eventbrite and stuff like that. There wasn't anything like that for Drupal. We built it out. It's a pretty simple module, no worries. But it's grown to 1,000 installs with a really active issue queue. We don't really have any projects that need us to kind of maintain that further right now. But I got an email from a guy who's like, hey, there's like 6 patches in the queue. We really need this updated. Do you guys have, are you going to keep maintaining this? Otherwise, please give it up. And I was like, it's a really fair request. It's kind of like, shit or get off the pot. So I sent an email to my dev team, and I'm like, somebody please take ownership of this, or do we have a project that has a need for this module that we can maybe borrow some budget for to improve it for that project and hence the community. And it turned out we did. So we're going to invest like half a day into patching it up and fixing it, use that new version for our client project, and again, I think it'll be a decent win all around. What are my notes on this one? Well, I'm out of time anyway, so oh yeah, I'm sorry, I remember now. So my final point here is so what is what's the bottom line impact? Again, speaking as a business owner, like we need to make enough money here to keep the doors open and provide a good living for everybody who's working with us. I would argue that I was going to show a graph here, but I decided not to. But the bottom line is for us, as our contributions have grown and our use, we have like this metric about like our usage stats along with our revenue, and they track. I know it's not necessarily causation; it's correlation for sure. But I think that if done right, you can really build a successful business on open source contributions in this type of a model. So that's it. Happy to open up for questions for either of us, please. Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could explain the whole side by someone who choose not to do it.
From which side? Like as a customer? Well, I mean, as a vendor, I think that if you think you're doing something that has going to give you a competitive advantage, if you don't share it, I mean, that's the only reason I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the only reasons, and I mentioned with a few exceptions, that we will give people sort of exemptions is if a change that we're making, a module or module we're creating has sort of their core business sort sort of processes in them that they're proprietary to their business, then that's something. If they don't want to share it, it's not. I mean, it's something we'll consider taking up for attention. That would be the only one. These days, I think increasingly, if your advantage is in software and not in something that's built on top of the software, then probably you're on your way out anyway. I mean, software is being commoditized to such a high degree that what used to, just in general sense, what used to take like $5 million to start a business today is almost free. So I think there's not really a ton of risks that are presented specifically by it, and insofar as there are risks, they're generally business risks that you're already facing. This is not gonna change that. One of the other things to keep in mind is, a lot of times it gets painted as like between vendors and shops, it gets painted in a way of, well, should you be able to contribute to open source? But a lot of times that's almost secondary to, are you doing this as work for hire, which is a contractual issue. And we never do work for hire either, so that's like a whole other thing. So there's lots of reasons why it's confusing, very few why you should not contribute that specifically.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference work for hire versus structure?
Sure. As an independent contractor, you own your IP in America as a default. The only way that you lose your IP as a contractor, your IP rights as a creator of something, is if you specifically exempt the organization from it and say you're an employee. But unless you're getting employer's comp and all sorts of other things that you would get as protections as an employee, why would you ever give up your rights? So as a business, I think it would be equivalent to like if Web built the Mailchimp module for the first client and then couldn't build any more of those for other clients, even though it started getting successful. It's almost like punishing you for your success as a contractor if you disallow yourself from doing the work you did again. They could. I mean, if they wanted to enforce it. They could say it's our IP, you can't do what you want with it. Similar to like if you were an employee and your employer, you made some code for your employer, they own that code if you're an employee. But as a contractor, the creator under default in U.S. IP law, the actual creator owns their own IP. A lot of times it's co-creator, so it's confusing. Because this is open source, that's usually only important if you go for a patent anyway. And you're probably not going to want to patent something that's open source.
Or if you want to redistribute it. Obviously with the GPL you can't do that either if you don't want to keep it closed. I'm not really the contract guy, but I know in our contracts we grant work for hire for our creative output for clients.
Right.
And we specifically draw a line around anything that's related to open source engineering.
Yeah, so we call out a lot of things like their data, their theme, their look and feel. Those are not things that we're considering as part of that's their work, that's their inventions or work product. And just us implementing them doesn't change that basic fact, but things that are more programmatic.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Mailchimp module.
Yeah.
Have you looked at integrating with Mandrill, or is that from email?
Yeah, we do both.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Mandrill project's pretty active too, and we're definitely actively working on that. So yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
So if you have any complaints, I don't want to hear.
Yeah, well, you want to talk about that?
Awesome. That's what I want to hear.
We love that.
That's great. I'm teasing. I'll take complaints too.
There are like so many email problems. Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. Good. I'm glad you guys are using it. Anybody else? All right. Thanks a lot, folks.
Thank you. And we'll have these slides online later today. Here.
Let's stop the.